What we're going to do now is we're going to focus on an actual calculation. And this is pretty much going to be the majority of our lecture is going to be focusing on this. If you want, maybe you find this section in your book or print this page out from examples in your book or write it down, paper and pencil, because this is the information we're going to be using to work through the problem that we're looking at here. What we've got here is we're making ice cream, as we've been discussing, and we've got a bunch of information here. We've got inventory in process on July 1st. There's 5,000 gallons of inventory in process. That inventory that is in process has already had direct materials put into it of 5,000 gallons. It's already had conversion costs. As you remember, conversion is direct labor and factory overhead. You've already had conversion costs, and it's about 70% complete. So what they're saying here is right now, sitting in a vat, if you will, is ice cream that is already had all of its materials put into it, and it's already 70% complete. So let's just put some time on it just to give it some meaning here. Let's say it takes 10 hours in order to mix ice cream. What we're saying here is that the ice cream that is in process on July 1st is already 70% complete as far as those conversion costs, meaning it's been in there, it's been in process for 7 hours, and maybe it has another 3 to go. Okay, just to put some time on it to make it a little bit more real. So the inventory in process on July 1st has a dollar value of $6,225. Your direct materials cost for July. So now what we're doing is we're trying to figure out what happened in the month of July and how are we going to apply the costs to the ice cream that we make in July. So what we're looking at here is you've got direct materials for July. You have 60,000 gallons of ice cream going into process. Your direct labor for July is 10,500, and your factory overhead is 7,275. All right. So these are the total production costs for the month and for the ones that we finish. Alright, so what we're looking for is what is the cost of the goods that we're transferring to packaging in July. We finished 62,000 gallons of ice cream. That's what got transferred over. But what is the cost of that ice cream that got transferred over? And what is the inventory that is in process on July 31st? There's 3,000 gallons that is currently in process and it's 25% complete. So what you mean by that is that there's ice cream that is currently being mixed on July 31st that is only 25% complete. So again, if it's 10 hours, then it had 2.5 hours to be processed so far. All right, it has another 7.5 hours to be processed in August when the ice cream gets finished. Okay, so there's a lot of information to look at, and we're really only looking at one department here. We're looking at the mixing department. And let's go to the next slide. The first step in this whole process is to determine what ice cream had to still be, what ice cream was started and finished, what ice cream was still at the end, still being worked on, and what ice cream from the beginning ice cream got finished. All right, that's a little bit confusing. Why don't I write that down for you here? So these are our 3 categories, and no matter how you start these problems, this is where you need to start. You need to look at what ice cream had already been started on July 1st. What was sitting in there on July 1st ready to be finished. Alright, so this is your beginning inventory basically. How many gallons of this ice cream were started and completed during the month? And what ice cream is still in process on July 31st? Okay, so we're already told this information. We're told that 3,000 gallons are still in process on July 31st, and we were also told that 5,000 gallons were in here to begin with. Okay? Now, the other thing that they told you, and let's see if I can get back to that slide. Go up. The other thing that they told you was that 62,000 gallons of ice cream went to the next process, which is packaging, in July. Okay, so that means that you basically finished 62,000 gallons worth of ice cream, and that's how much went to the next process. So now going back to the Excel page here, you think about this. You finished 62,000 gallons of ice cream. You had 5,000 in there that were already being worked on, right? So the question is how many were started and completed during the month? And this is probably one of the biggest challenges of this problem, is coming up with this number. Well, started and completed during the month was 57,000 gallons. Now, how did I come up with that? Well, if you look at it for a second, you had 5,000 gallons that were in process already. You started and completed another 57,000 gallons. The sum of these, adding these two together, the 5,000 and the 57,000, is 62,000 gallons worth of ice cream. That's how much was started, had already been started, and was finished, and these were started and completed. So 62,000 gallons, these two guys, went to the next process. And there's still 3,000 gallons worth of ice cream still sitting, being worked on, in process on July 31st. All right, these three categories are the three most important categories that you're going to be dealing with, because now the next step is we have to start applying something called equivalent units to this process, because we need to apply, ultimately our goal is to apply costs, dollar values, not just gallons, to each one of these items. And this is a good example of a visual breakdown of what we just talked about. You had 5,000 gallons in beginning inventory, 57,000 that were started and completed, and 3,000 that are still sitting in ending inventory. Okay, now what you were told back a few slides ago on your informational slide is you were told 60,000 gallons went into the mixing department in July. That was part of your information set. Well, you could have figured out what was started and completed in that information set by saying, okay, well, there's 3,000 gallons still in inventory, so that means of the 60,000 that went in July, 57,000 must have been started and completed during the month. Okay, so hopefully that helps you look at it from even a slightly different perspective. Okay, so here you go. Here's our breakdown, as I said. All right, same thing as I did, but a little bit broken down a little bit differently. Now the idea is to apply costs. We can't apply the same costs to the units that were finished, that were started and completed during the month, as the same costs that were for the items that were not completed during the month. Okay, does it make sense to apply the same direct labor to items that were started and completed, the same amount of direct labor to the items that were started and completed as to the items that are still in ending inventory? Right? They still haven't had all of their direct labor applied to them. So you can't apply costs in the same way. You're kind of looking at apples and oranges. You're looking at comparing a product that was started and completed and finished during the month to one that's still in process. So the question is how do you apply those costs fairly and equally? Well, the way that you're going to apply those costs is we're going to use something called equivalent units of production. And what we're going to do is we're going to say how long, how many equivalent units were completed for each of these products. This might be a little bit confusing, but let's go straight to the numbers here. All right. So we're starting off. We've got inventory in process on July 1st. That's our first information, 5,000. You have those that are started and completed. There's your 57,000, and you have those still in ending inventory that are 3,000. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to look at direct materials and we're going to look at conversion costs and the equivalent units for each. So I'm going to come over to my Excel and I'm going to do this kind of on my own. I'm going to do pretty much what's on those slides, but this way you can at least see me work through it. So what we're doing is we're trying to find out the equivalent units for materials. That's what we're doing here. Expand that a little bit. All right. So I suggest highly that you take a few minutes and you stop this and you go read up on equivalent units so you get a better understanding of what we're doing here. But I really want to show you the math in here. Okay, so what we're saying is we're saying how many materials needed to get added to these units in July. Well, if you think about when you're making ice cream, when are you putting everything into the process? You're putting everything into the process at the very beginning, right? You're putting all your creams and your sugars and everything else, you're dumping them into one giant vat, if you will, and they're mixing, and the amount of conversion costs, or rather the time it takes to convert it into a finished product, if you will, is going to be all conversion, all the time that it takes to mix it. But when you put the material in, you're putting it all in at the very beginning of the process. So looking at the first category, ice cream already started on July 1st, you've got 5,000 gallons that has already begun being processed, right? Being mixed. When were the materials added for this process? Does it still have any more materials to be added to it? Well, if this ice cream is already being mixed, it doesn't need any more materials since materials are all added at the beginning of the process. So with this, you have no units, you have no materials that need to be added to the ice cream that has already been begun. All right? Now for the ones that are started and completed, well, do they need all of their materials? Of course they do, right? So 100% of these materials goes into the started and completed category. Each one of these units, each one of these gallons of ice cream being made had all of their materials applied to it during the month of July. Now for the ice cream in process on July 31st, for that ice cream, if you step back and think about it, If the ice cream has already begun being mixed, well, if all materials are added at the beginning of the process, then this ice cream has already had all of its materials applied to it. So you've got 3,000 equivalent units for the inventory, the items that are still in process at the end of the month. Okay, so this one's not so bad for this part of it. Where it's going to start getting a little bit confusing is when we're looking at equivalent units for conversion costs. Now, if you remember, as I said before, conversion costs are direct labor and factory overhead, and we look at those costs together. And the reason we do so is because, if you remember, one of the common drivers would be direct labor for factory overhead costs. So we kind of tie the two of them together in this. All right, let me continue on with the next series here.